Hey everybody, welcome to the Irresistible Brand Podcast. I am Matt Deutschman. I'm the owner of Doubletake Promotional Marketing. And since 2010, we've been helping colleges and universities and corporations in various industries with promotional products and branded merchandise. And over the years, the four key strategic initiatives we typically support with promotional products are client appreciation, referral generation, employee engagement and retention, and recruiting and onboarding. Companies that execute these four areas well develop an irresistible brand, which clients can't help but refer to others, employees can't help but promote, and recruits can't wait to join. Thus, the Irresistible Brand Podcast, where I talk with other leaders in those key strategic areas. I am really excited to be joined today by John Casey. John Casey is the president and founder of Shamrock Consultants, Incorporated, located in Naperville, Illinois. Previous to founding Shamrock, John worked in the search industry, then became a paramedic and firefighter, and eventually an investigator for the fire service. Upon founding Shamrock, John quickly became known for his talent for identifying leadership talent in organizations and was hired by several of the largest companies in the consumer packaged goods industry to assess their internal leadership and the structure that supported it. In this work, John uncovered the lack of development programs by these organizations and put together the first iteration of what became the Shamrock paradigm, or a leader's playbook. Since then, the paradigm has continued to be refined as Shamrock grew and their customers' needs changed with the evolving cultures of business. John, thank you so much for being with me today. I want to just start off by asking you, what does the concept of an irresistible brand mean to you?
Great question, Matt, and thank you again for having me. Excited to be here. Sure. When you think about an irresistible brand, and we think about our own branding, Shamrock's brand, which is now 28 years old, it's funny that we work a lot with consumer packaged goods companies, because in that business, so your Crafts and Nestle's and such of the world, General Mills, brand is it. It really is it. And I think that over the years, they've taught me the value of the brand, not just the integrity, which I'm a big believer in, the integrity of your brand and the integrity of, what your company represents and the people who represent your company, what they represent when they're out there presenting your company. But I think even the value of the brand, I was just sitting there thinking about it, and, what value do you provide to your clients, above and beyond what your competition can provide?
I like that. And I think, you hit on a couple of things there that, that your brand is, you didn't mention anything regarding marketing or any, the way that we speak about our brand to our consumers or anything like that. No, it's all about the people, and it's all about the essence of what your brand is all about in how you come across in everything that you do, and the integrity. I mean, those are some bold, strong words and principles that tie back into what the brand is all about. And, you've been a leadership consultant with, like just read in your bio, some of the world's largest companies in the CPG industry. But I think a lot of the principles that you teach and that you come across with your clients are things that can be applied to companies of all sizes. So what are some of the most important principles, I guess, that you come across with regard to strong leadership that you think are applicable to really any leader in any size organization?
Yeah, that's also a great question. And it's a question I think I get asked fairly frequently. I always say, there's two magical ingredients to start with, I think, when you're looking at potential leaders or current leaders. And those are curiosity and humility, which we can talk more about later. And then from there, we've developed what we call our paradigm, right? Our way of being, that's the playbook. And it's around integrity, it's around accountability, it's around curiosity, innovation, communication, of course. But it's not just the words, and I had a conversation with a client earlier this morning around that. It's just like your brand, right? Your brand's a name, it's a word, but it's the representation of those, right? So what does that actually mean to have good accountability and good communication? Those are certainly two of the tops. And in my opinion, by far, probably the most important is curiosity. So that's why I said, when I say two magic ingredients, I find that if you want to make somebody into a great leader or make them into a better leader, they have to have curiosity and humility.
Let's unpack that further. Why curiosity, and what does it mean to be curious in the way that you're referring to it as. It's not just like,
I wonder.
it's not Curious George, children's books or something like that. Like it's a lot more profound than that, I imagine. So can you unpack it a little further?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, the humility piece is also, not that all shucks humility. It's more the humility to recognize that you can grow, that you can improve, that you can change. I think that's probably the most important word is change. That you have an opportunity to change, and that, to your point, regardless of the size of the company, you have the power, to change. And really, when you get into curiosity, it does. Simon Sinek kind of made it famous in a book. The power of the why, and it's the ability to ask the why, but not just for me to say, "Hey, Matt, why would you do that?" But for me to ask myself, "Why would I do that?" or "Why did Matt do that?" So it's really, really getting deeper into what we call pure curiosity, and that's that ability to just sit back and look at a situation and say, okay, well, why, if Matt's an otherwise logical person, which I assume you are, right? Why did Matt do X, Y, or Z, or why didn't Matt do X, Y, or Z? So that's something we look at very, very deeply and continuously with folks, because you have to constantly be slowing yourself down and saying, wait a minute, why did this occur? Why didn't that occur? Same in marketing, right? I guess, we all think our marketing messages are the most brilliant ever, right? And then why did the people respond to it? Why didn't they respond to it? I think that's probably the first question. I know it's one of the first questions you've asked me, even when we talked about marketing and talked about brand representation. So it's that ability to really get into the why. And that's what Simon gets into in his book. And he's a phenomenal writer. I really think the world of his ability to kind of present that idea that a lot of us have been practicing for many, many years. And, where it shows up in the world, and I don't know if you're looking for an example, but is if, there's countless examples, and my clients refer to them as us finding the hidden gems. Mm-hmm. And, you'll find that employee that is struggling right now, but you have to say, why are they struggling? Right? Do they not have the tools? Do they not have the right mindset? Or have they just not been given the opportunity, up until that point? We've taken countless folks from low ends of the organization and been able to build up their capabilities to help them get promoted 3, 4, 5 times. And very proud of that, but also very proud of them for having the curiosity to, continuously keep looking for their skills, and the organizations for their ability to invest in them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sounds like that's extremely important. It reminds me of the old saying. It's like, why would we invest in our people if they might leave? Well, what's worse, not investing in your people and then they stay, right? So, how do you help clients to identify emerging leaders, or identify the people that they should invest in?
It's really, I think, doing an assessment. We do assessments. We do formal assessments of an organization. So we assess not only the organization, but then we assess the individuals that make up that organization, the leaders, so to speak, of that organization, the influencers of that organization. And we look at them, the way we do it, at least, is 3 different ways. We interview them to get their impression of what they're doing and where they're at. But, I think the other thing we do is observation. So we'll observe, how they behave in a meeting. They'll say they're a team player, and then you'll watch them in a meeting do something that they probably don't realize that they're doing that is not very team-based. And then the third piece, and probably the most powerful piece, a lot of folks know 360s, but we do live 360s. So we'll go out and we'll talk to people who are influenced by that particular leader, and we'll get feedback on their performance and how what they're doing is coming across, right? So people might think that they're communicating well. Communication, obviously, excuse me, is a word I think that gets thrown around a lot. And what we find happens is they'll do a survey, for example, and out of that survey will come, we need better communication around here. So what the organization does is they talk more, right? They'll put together these slides and presentations, or even in small organizations, right? We do it. So we go and we start talking a lot more. And really, just like with your wife, right? When someone's telling you you're not communicating very well, they're generally telling you you're not listening very well. So, what they're really looking for you to do is listen more. And I think that's where organizations have a huge opportunity is listen to your employees more. They'll tell you how to lead them. So
something I want to touch on, heading into this conversation, something I wanted to talk about with you is scheduled reviews and formal feedback sessions. And it was actually for a different reason that I wanted to ask you about that, but it's kind of come up now as a result of that comment. How do you see companies effectively setting up systems for frequently giving feedback to their teams and having that feedback loop and not having it just be kind of like an end of year, here's our big feedback session. And then we wait until the following end of year, so like, how does that work? And also in terms of just like how to structure those kinds of conversations or how to schedule those, but then to get into also like the give and take between listening and speaking and manager giving feedback and also team member giving feedback to their manager. What's the interplay there, and how do you see that all working very effectively?
That's a great point. We deal a lot with that with organizations, in larger organizations, but I think I've seen it's kind of scaling down into smaller organizations where folks try to give that formal review, right? That once a year type of review. And the problem with that is it's become that's why I said check the box type of an exercise, right? Yeah. Folks wait, and at the end of the year, December 27th, they put together, they have 10 people to report to them, and they go through all 10 of them, and they use a form, which isn't a bad idea. You have some structure at least to it, but then they give out grades and they give out, raises based off of those grades. And to your point, I think that a lot of times it turns into too much of a one-way conversation. I find I do that myself even sometimes, like, hey, let me give you some feedback. And that is a little bit awkward, I think, for the person receiving the feedback, to your point, because they're thinking, well, yes, but, and so that it affects how they receive the feedback, right? Because if that respect level goes down a little bit because you're not asking me for my feedback, then it's going to be more difficult for me to take the feedback that you're giving me. I've for years, worked with some of these companies to not just do it that way, because part of the problem is that it's really going to be my impression of you, from December 10th until December 27th, based on the way I told you earlier.
Right.
The previous 11 months might as well have not existed because they're not fresh in my memory. So what's fresh in my memory is going to be my impression of you. And that's dangerous. It's a dangerous place to get into, I think, from a performance review standpoint. So you asked a question around, I think one of the first places that organizations should start, and something we recommend to our clients, and most of them take us up on it, is to do more of a role review and start, really understanding the role. So you go into the role review, and it's very, very simple. Don't people overcomplicate it. I say it should be 15 to 30 minutes, but ahead of time, send the employee the opportunity to tell them what they think their role is and what do they think your role is and why, to both of those. And then you should do the same thing. You should say, here's what I think the employee's role is. Here's what I think my role is and why. And then you exchange them. And you literally, just can sit across from each other. You can do it on Zoom these days, but you just go through the role exchange and talk through the role exchange. And it's really quite helpful, because I think that's something that organizations, we get into, matrices and what I refer to as asset utilization, people utilization within an organization, and just beginning to understand how to utilize the assets that you have at your disposal most effectively. And you get into really well-structured. So, I brought up the fire service. And that's one of the places I learned the role piece, because the roles are so important in that job. You can have 4 people on a fire engine. And I was talking to somebody about this the other day. Most folks don't realize they all sit in a very specific seat based on their role within that operation. And when that operation begins, they all know exactly what their role is. That there's no grayness to it at all. And you're pulling up on a, people talk about firefighting, right? But you're pulling up on a pretty unpredictable situation. You never know what situation you're going to get, right? I mean, every fire is going to be somewhat different. Sure. Every emergency is going to be somewhat different, but everyone on that 4-person operation knows exactly what their role is. and executes it. And then what they do afterwards, again, which I recommend to organizations, so I'm going to tie this back, right, is they review it. After every single call they have, right, they review that call and how it went and what they could have done differently or better or worse, or hopefully not worse, but what could have possibly happened in that particular situation. So it's really well defined from a role standpoint. So we do that with organizations. So just begin to start having role conversations with your employees. So even if you're a 3-person operation, probably more importantly, because you have to wear all these different hats, right? What is your role and why? And I think that, again, back to the curiosity, that's tying the why back into it. Because the more I understand why I'm doing something, the more effectively I'm going to do it.
That's good tying it.
Yeah, if I understand the why, not if the organization, because you run an organization, I run an organization, we get why all these pieces should be occurring, right?
Right.
But
it's different that you can't dictate to someone else why. If you're dictating it rather than helping them to understand it or receiving their feedback of why they think they're doing something, then there's going to be a lot different level of buy-in and
absolutely.
And then you're going to have a lot different level of effectiveness in that role. And not because the person doesn't desire to be effective, it's because they're trying to do something for a different purpose or towards a different goal or towards a different why.
And you can all learn together. So again, it's you hit the key word there. Feedback, I think, is critical in the organizations. And I think even if you begin that as a twice-a-year event, then make it a monthly event, then you can make it a weekly event, where both sides can provide feedback to one another. You may not have, quote unquote, events like the fire service might, but you certainly have happenings in your organization, and it's an opportunity to provide feedback.
Sure. And
to me, you should always, as a leader, ask the other person first, so tell me how you think that went. Because they might think it went a certain way, and you can listen and say, okay, they don't have training in this area. I'm now recognizing that, right? That now I see, back to your question earlier about how do you assess an organization. Okay, now I have an opportunity to train that person in this particular area. They didn't know any better. That's why they didn't do it the way I thought that they would do it, right? They weren't aware of it, or they thought that, back to the why, they thought this is why we do it. So they did it slightly different to your, you brought it up earlier, based on what they felt the why was. So it helps us understand and helps us begin. That's communication. That's when you get into real communication. That's not, I'm not just talking to you, telling me what I think.
Sure. Well, and I mean, the analogy of, using a fire is obviously strong in business situations. We all say, oh, I'm putting out fires in my business. And we use that term kind of flippantly, yes. But even, more thoroughly than that, when you just say that there are 4 firefighters on a fire truck and each of them have a different role and they sit in a specific seat depending on what the role is. Well, that's, that's exactly how a company operates, right? Everybody has a different role, and you sit in a different seat, you do different tasks, you are equipped differently depending on what your role is and what your, the expectations of that role are. And, if you take a client meeting as the equivalent of, fighting a fire, right? Everybody has a different responsibility. If you're going to have, 4 people from your organization enter a client meeting together to make a presentation to a client or assess a situation with a client. And so it's important for everybody to be aware of what their function is and their purpose in that meeting.
Absolutely. And you can compare it, right? You're talking about from a business to a fire standpoint. Like I said, the most important person in putting out the fire is the person who's actually putting out the fire, right? Yes and no. And that's generally, by the way, not the leader. Actually, it's rarely the leader of that particular group. The leader is generally stepping back, assessing the broader situation. The person who sits directly behind them on the fire engine is what they call the pipe man, or the person who actually is going to take the hose and go and put the water on the fire. But that person is useless unless that engineer, the person driving the engine, can get them water. So they operate like the pump and such. So it's pretty fascinating to watch. And when you watch organized organizations, for example, I frequently watch and coach leaders who try to take over meetings. It's like, let the meeting occur. Let your folks run the meeting. That's their job. You're there to facilitate, sit back and see the dynamics and see opportunities for coaching, see opportunities for improvement, see opportunities that's your role. And then to provide that feedback, afterwards, back then, that's where I learned that technique, right? The officer would come and say, how do you think that went? And you would say, and then becoming the officer, I would go then to folks, go, how do you think that went?
How do you think that went? That's an important question. And it's important to shut up and not try to answer it yourself before asking that of your team member. And that's something I'll admit I struggle with it. If it's myself and a member of my team on a call with a client, my first tendency that I have to catch myself on after the meeting is over, I'll say to my employee, oh, well, I'll just start, chiming in with how I thought it went. And then I'll say, and what do you think? It should be, what do you think first? And then we talk about it. And something just to kind of touch on the feedback loop that you mentioned. I mean, something that I used to do in my organization is I would have, just like you said, I would have year-end employee reviews. And then a few years ago, I was hiring, hiring a new member of my team and someone who is with me now. One of the things that reasons I asked her, why are you looking for something new? Why are you looking to change? And she talked a little bit about, how she felt at the culture of the company that she was with previously. And she said, I've been here 3 years and I haven't had a review yet. And I was thinking to myself, I always thought that reviews were things that employees, from the employee's standpoint, they look at it as like, oh, I'm rolling my eyes about this thing. It's like some lame meeting that, my manager has to put me through to check a box. But she actually desired to have a review because she felt that was a good opportunity for her to give and receive feedback on her work and kind of advance her career forward and advance her role within her organization. So that was something that was missing from her experience there. And that really opened my eyes to, wow, it's not a review is not just for me, it's for members of my team. Primarily, it's for them to learn and for us to exchange ideas, and it has to be an exchange. It's not just a one-way street.
Right.
So that's where I really solidified my review process of doing it at that time once, or we did a mid-year review. So we did it twice a year. But even since then, over the last couple of years, we now do weekly, we call it WAMs, weekly accountability meetings, where anyone who kind of directly reports to someone else or directly works with someone else has a quick, it could be a half-hour meeting once a week where we just kind of update one another on what's going on with the projects that we're working on. And it's a time for, giving feedback and, for me and my team members, it's a member of me asking, just how they're doing in general, how they're feeling about things, generally speaking, and also giving some coaching and some feedback and hopefully some development. And that's, I think we've still done the twice a year review meetings, the mid-year and the year end, but those have become less heavy as a result, because it's not as though we haven't done this in a long time. No, we talk every week in this same manner. Now it's just kind of let's see if we need to cumulatively discuss anything, because we're at key points throughout the year. So I don't know. What's your
absolutely.
perspective on that?
And I think it's a great opportunity too, Matt, for them to begin to develop their own presentation skills, and for you to listen to how do they present an idea? How do they present themselves? Because what that's going to begin to do is give you a glimpse into how they're going to represent your brand. We talked about that before, and that's key, right? Is how they represent. You get into sales folks, right? When we coach sales folks, and it's interesting because, what I coach the sales leaders on is look for how they're presenting, because that's how they're presenting to your customers when you're not there. Mm-hmm. Right? It's just so you can begin to see, where their strengths are at. You begin to see where their opportunities, where their coaching opportunities are at. And it's a great opportunity then to go and ask them. We literally did this for a very large company, probably shouldn't mention who, but I think cleaning wipes. So, and it was fascinating with our sales team that, coaching some of these leaders and realizing thinking, okay, that's the same way you're going to be talking to Walmart, right? To one of the big customers out there. So how do you think this comes across when you say this? So that's how we would coach them. Again, asking them questions. That's what coaching really is the ability to ask questions and steer a conversation and get somebody to really self-reflect and be back to that word introspective, about themselves and their performance, because they know what they're doing. They know, where their opportunities are. And it's hard for them to talk about that if you're grilling them. If you're asking them questions, they can say, well, I think that I really struggle in this particular area. And say, okay, well, what if you had asked another question in that situation? That's a good point. They'll write it down and they'll think about it. Now that you're developing skills in them that they didn't have, that they have, but that weren't coming out before. It's kind of bringing out, I mentioned this book to you before, The Attributes, and I like it because it just basically says we all have these attributes inside of us. That's one of the key points that I took out of the book. We all have them. It's just how do you draw those attributes or those skills, those behaviors out of people? You generally don't do it by telling them. You generally can do it by asking them and letting them think about it. And I mean, people are 98% of the healthy folks out there are, proud and want to do a good job. They really do. I mean, that's one of the precepts that I teach to leaders in general is always assume the other person wants to do a good job. It's hard to do sometimes, don't get me wrong, especially if somebody's made a monumental or whatever mistake, right, that we all talk about, or hasn't done well, recently. They want to do well. So what's keeping them from doing well?
Well, let's talk.
Yeah.
Sorry. So we've talked about ongoing feedback and ongoing leadership. Let's kind of rewind in the relationship with an employee at a company and go back to when they first join, and even the recruiting process, because I know that you work a lot with those kinds of areas as well. Training and onboarding programs, and then also the importance of making someone. Because to your point, everybody wants to do well, right? Nobody joins a new company and starts a new job, or virtually no one joins a new company, starts a new job without some excitement surrounding it, or some, positive idea of what the opportunities are for the future, right? But we all know people who hate their jobs and who have been in their jobs for 20 years and still hate their jobs, or, are leaving their jobs because they hate their jobs. Well, what can leaders do to tap into that excitement that new employees have at the beginning of taking on that job, and use that fire, not to belabor that analogy, but use that fire to really ignite their entrance into the company and keep that going strong?
Yeah, that's an awesome point, because if you think about it, right, what's one of the most exciting times in your life, right, outside of marriage and outside of family, but professionally, it's getting hired on a new job. I mean, the excitement that you mentioned it, you mentioned it probably 3 or 4 times there, right? It's excitement. It's you're excited. You're looking forward. You're thinking about all the great things that are going to happen to you at this company because of maybe what hasn't happened to you at previous companies. So your anticipation level is very, very high. So your curiosity is also very, very high. What's this company going to do for me? And so about, almost 20 years ago now, 19 years ago, worked with, I'll mention them because I think I was very proud of them. Nestle. We were doing some work with Nestle with one of their ice cream divisions. And we started this concept around the first 100 days. And it could be the first, and people have written books since then, right? First 90 days, first 100 days, et cetera. It's all based on the same concepts. And the concept is you're setting the employee up for success during those first 100 days, or you're setting them up for failure during those first 100 days. So I'll give you the negative analogy first, right? Your employee comes on board, they're all excited, they're ready to go, but they don't get their computer for the first 2 weeks. That it takes their level of excitement down, or they don't get their email address set up correctly, or their pay doesn't get set up correctly. I've seen that happen a number of times. That's why payroll can be so important to organizations. We look at it as a check the box type of a situation. But there's so many things that can happen. Their training, their introduction to the customers, all of these points are things that we can miss or we can hit on. So I always say it should be well structured, but start out in the beginning and just think about it from the employee's perspective. They're feeling pressure. They're feeling that pressure to perform. And sometimes, right, we put them right in there, right on the front line, right in the line of sight, as the saying goes. And they're probably not going to perform optimally, if you think about it. Versus, one of the things we did with Nestle, we took plant leaders over, I think it was a 750 person operation, pretty big operation. And I said, for the first week, all I want them to do is meet people. And I remember that first the VP was like, well, I don't need to get in there and start learning the process. And I'm like, no. Just meet people, meet the head of quality, meet the head of HR, meet the head of sales, meet all these people that they're going to be interacting with down the road. So they begin to develop a relationship, because if I developed a relationship with you over coffee and we've talked about family and, what we like to do on the, we like to bicycle, or do we like to, whatever we like to do, on the side, it's going to make it much easier when a fire does happen for us to be able to relate to each other and to not see each other as an opponent, but to say, well, that's a good guy. He's got, family, he's got kids, it literally takes that behavior and it lowers that level of potential, what we call potential conflict. So that's just one piece of the first 100 days, right? And again, it's just having people learn things. And again, back to the point, seeking feedback. What do people like about your training process? What do they think you could improve on? These should be questions you should be asking someone in the first 30 days. What have they liked so far? What have they found beneficial? What have they found to be a waste of time? Maybe what they found to be a waste of time isn't a waste of time, but they perceived it that way. So how much do you think they really invested in it? So that now we need to go, okay, I need to work on how we present that to folks going forward. You still have to recognize everyone's different.
Sure.
But at the same time, there's ways to, I believe, to build and structure that. We get the majority of onboarding programs, and this is at major companies that have much larger budgets than probably most of our clients, right? These are companies that have tens of millions of dollars to spend, and yet over 90% of the folks find the orientations to be a complete waste of time. Think about that. So in other words, your $10 million you spent on it.
Sure. The number one expense line item you have is your payroll, and the way that you welcome your new members of your team to your organization, which is a pivotal component of setting them up for success and enthusiasm for the long haul while they're with your organization. You kind of mail it in on that initial step and provide something that they view as a waste of time.
Yeah. I mean, think about an expensive automobile, right? You invest in a Porsche. You don't take it and drive it on a rocky road with mud the first day you own it. I've never seen anyone do that, at least, to a Porsche, right? You just wouldn't do that. It's a valuable asset. So what are you doing to invest in your asset? And that's a way that, again, I know sometimes folks from an HR perspective don't like to call them assets because it implies that they're a piece of equipment or such. But sometimes we treat our new equipment better than we do our new employees. We need to think they're an asset. We need to be investing in them. We need to be feeding them, going forward, fueling, with the ability to represent our brand.
Well, and something that I thought that you said was interesting in that first 100, that team at Nestle, they said, for the first, what was it, 2 weeks or whatever, I just want you to meet people.
Well,
just walk around and meet people.
It was actually the first, I think, 10 days of his employment. Yeah.
So I think that, that's an important thing that is maybe it's a little more nebulous than in terms of putting together a training program, an onboarding program. You have like the nuts and bolts of the job. That's more straightforward in how to train someone on the job itself. The culture, onboarding someone into the company culture is a little bit, there's not a clear-cut way to do so. And I think a lot of organizations might feel like, oh, that could just happen organically. Over time, you'll start to, meet your coworkers, and you'll just kind of get a feel for that, and you'll start to fit in, and you'll just start to meet people as you get going. Particularly with some organizations still entirely remote these days, or at the very least, many organizations in a hybrid format, or where in the old days there would be you'd be in the office 5 days a week. Maybe you're in the office 2 or 3 days a week now, and for the foreseeable future. It seems like just I like the term for, running into people organically in person, like the collisions, right? There's just a lot less opportunity for collisions. So there's a lot less opportunity for that organic culture building. How do you advocate that organizations should involve cultural orientation or cultural onboarding into their onboarding process? And then what like tangible strategies should organizations or can organizations do when they have a virtual workforce to be able to provide opportunities for people to meet?
Yeah. So and I think people have gotten creative. Actually, I think you were one of the people that I noted during the pandemic that got creative with that, right? Which is, you have Zoom happy hours, or you have to do things today that we didn't have to do previously. But I would say, again, a really large portion of organizations weren't doing the happy hour and the meet and greet with employees either, before this. So I think it just exasperated it, with the pandemic. So I think that you need to focus on that personal piece. Again, right. I think literally for the first 100 days an employee's there, once a week, you should have some type of a coffee gathering, and again, if it's over Zoom, it's over Zoom. So be it. I'm a bigger proponent of doing it in person, because you're right. We do get more of it. It's a personal touch. It has a personal, it gets into actually, all the different chemicals that get released and things of that nature, and how people feel, I don't want to get too deep into that. I'm sure that's not what you wanted this webcast to be about, but it gives people
wherever it goes, it's organic. It's fine.
But it gives people an opportunity to, again, to see each other as colleagues and as people that they maybe don't want to hang out with necessarily, but certainly want to be around and can appreciate each other's. And you can talk shop if you want to, but getting people together and having that interaction, I think, is what you're asking. I believe is absolutely critical. And that's why we made it a component when we did our first 100 days with Nestle, that whole project. We made it critical that there was the personal component to it in the beginning, because literally the VPs first, they said, okay, well, here's the jobs, here's the pieces of equipment they need to learn, here's the processes they need to learn, here's our TPM process, here's what we need. I was like, okay, slow down. Why don't they get to know the other people first? Because they're going to be interacting with these folks. Like I said, you want to avoid future conflicts. And the more that you work on that part of it, the less conflicts you're going to have statistically. It's just, that's the way psychology works.
Sure.
The more I know you as a person, the less likely I am going to be to have a major conflict with you. Again,
well, not to oversimplify it,
fights, but
not to oversimplify it, but when you call the cable company because your cable's out, or when you call it, because your internet's not working properly, how easy is it to get mad at the other person on the other end of the phone who you've never met, you'll never meet, you're never going to know that person. You'll say a lot of things to that person over the phone that you would never say to someone you actually know and need to interact with on a regular basis, right? So it's just as simple as that, right?
A good friend of mine, might be somebody for you to consider in the future, Christine Churchill, does customer service. And her and I talk about those type of things all the time. She works with customer service organizations because they're getting fired on by people who have no relationship with them and nothing to lose by firing on them. I mean,
right.
You talk about, I travel
nothing to gain, maybe also, but,
I travel a ton, and I just brought it up recently again. I said, it's the old, what is it? The honey gets you more than, I can't remember.
Yeah, honey gets you more than vinegar
or something along those lines. Yeah. And I get treated very well by people in airlines, people at car rental companies, people at hotels, just because of the way I treat them up front, because I treat them as a friend instead of saying, even if they make a mistake, I say, okay, let's walk backwards in this, and just, if you take the tone you take with them is going to make all the difference in the world versus that person who's firing away at them. They're going to, you just watch it sometimes. They're like, oh, let's see if we can find a room for you in the parking lot, sir.
But the point is, you have to kind of frame that for yourself when you're talking to the person at the car rental desk who didn't have your car ready. You have to actually think about it for yourself. Let me approach this as though this is a friend, or this is a colleague of mine who I know their backstory, and we've met, and and we're going to meet again next week because that we work together frequently. You're going to be a lot kinder and gentler to that person than you otherwise would be if you
And it can be hard to do, right? So then imagine that in work environments. I know that's what happens in work environments, because I'll tell you, I've been there at 11 o'clock at night and they don't have your car ready, right? And you just want to get to a hotel and get some sleep because you have a meeting the next day. And I'm not going to say I've been perfect. I've been that poor performer, as I call it, but it doesn't get you as far as the other way. So then now take that over a 200 and how many days a year do we work? 210 or whatever it is. You take that over a 210 day period of time, right? You want people to be able to understand each other and slow down and what we call assume positive intent. It's another tool that we teach, literally. As often as you can, assume the other person is trying to do the right thing. It might be backwards, but assume they're trying to do the right thing.
I love that.
Or just even assume sometimes that they're trying.
Yeah.
And I
think to kind of bring this conversation in for a landing, I think that's been one of the themes that you've brought up multiple times regarding different situations. Assuming positive intent. Assume, you said earlier that like 98% of people, they really want to do a good job in their role.
Yes.
Right. They need to understand the expectations and the responsibilities and the role and understand the why behind it. Right. But they want to do a good job. So you have to assume that people really do want to do a good job. And then the first 100 days concept, everybody is excited to start a new job. They want to do a good job. They're excited for the opportunities that presents. The company has to meet them at that level and then bring them to that positive area. So it's not to like make this overly kumbaya or overly simplistic, but if you kind of go at it with the assumption that the person on the other side of whatever meeting, whether it's an onboarding meeting, or if it's an employee review, or even if you're in the employee seat talking with your manager, you have to go with the assumption that the other person is really coming from a positive place. And if we all can assume that, then it'll enable us to interact better, and it'll be for the betterment of the organization as a whole.
And think about it, Matt. You want them to succeed.
Mm-hmm.
If you're the person who hired them, I don't know if there's anybody else who wants them to succeed more than you.
Right.
Because we all know the frustration of employees not working out.
Sure.
And then look at the dynamic that we have and the culture that we have right now. We have turnover at unprecedented. I'm not trying to be negative, but I'm saying we have turnover at unprecedented levels today.
Sure.
Never seen turnover like this before in our country. 60 years, right? We've never seen turnover like this. So it tells us there's a lot of opportunity there for improvement. It tells us there's a lot of opportunity there for folks to be looking at some of these tools, some of these ideas, and really making them work, really investing in their people. Because again, you hired people, the cost, to train somebody, the cost to just your time, your blood, sweat, and tears, right? If you own an organization, or if you're the chief principal, or you're the vice president, the amount of time that you put into those people succeeding, you want to refine it. You want to make it the best. Just a thought.
Well, yeah. And I remember, we've known one another for several years, and I know that sometimes it's difficult to get the point across to an organization, the hard costs of leadership, because leadership is sort of an ephemeral
soft skill
concept. Yeah. So do you have any metrics, or even just like an example or an anecdote of like a numerical impact that leadership has made to an organization, or that, incorporating some of the principles we've talked about in this conversation have actually had on the bottom line of an organization?
I've had several, and sometimes they're on maybe a larger scale, but so again, still
Which is
thinking about
fine.
from a scale standpoint. We had an organization that had, I think it was 31% turnover, and they had around 650 employees at their site. Just the cost of the turnover to the organization was over $9 million a year. $9 million. So think about that.
And so 31%, what's industry standard in that space? I mean, because you're never going to have zero. So like, what should they?
In that particular industry, it was around 8%.
Wow. Okay.
World class is around 1% or less. Believe it or not.
Is it really? Oh, I did not. I didn't realize that it could,
at least in manufacturing,
could be considered that low. Yeah. I mean, obviously, world class would be 1% or less, but I didn't realize that there are organizations that operate consistently at that level.
Absolutely. I had a friend who ran one out in Iowa, and a union operation at that. And his turnover was, I think, a running average over like 6 years of like 0.9%.
Wow.
Just under 1%. And as he joked, he said he would have liked it would have been 2%. He was obviously making a joke towards a union, right? He was saying, in other words, sometimes the union drove him crazy. He would like to see some of those folks go away, but they still had very low turnover, right? Because they had a vision, they had goals, they operated, with acceptable behaviors. They they did the right things, in terms of onboarding and start. He took my 100-day idea and implemented it, in his organization. They take and look for every opportunity they can to invest in those assets, the same as they do in the equipment assets. And by the way, he retired as the plant manager, right? And left, and their metrics have now declined by 25% in 1 year. And he says, well, it's probably due to something. I think it's 100% due to the leadership and the leadership change. He should have put some more sustainable systems in place, maybe. But, we've had other organizations. You talk about the impact on leadership. So we had another organization where the site was losing $500,000. And that was around they were losing 400,000. And within less than 6 months, we got them to positive 50,000, which was a $6 million impact on the business. All they changed, they didn't change any equipment. They invested in us. But beyond that, outside of changing the way they did things in the same system, they were able to flip their metrics completely upside down. And
go deeper into that. What can an organization be doing? They were losing 400,000 over how long a period of time? Over a quarter or over?
So the first thing they really did, in my opinion, the first real change they made was something I alluded to earlier, and it's a recommendation I make frequently, is they were going to do this town hall, and they had prepared, I think they had left 45 minutes for it, 8 different functions, right? HR, quality, safety, et cetera. Everybody was going to present for 5 minutes each. And I said, so you're leaving like a minute at the end for the people to talk. They said, yeah, they usually don't have a lot of questions. I'm like, well, yeah, they're probably exhausted from being talked at, right? And it was a Canadian group, and they were like, no, I don't think that's the problem. I said, how about we just try it this way? He knew that his boss's boss had sent me in, right? So he was going to acquiesce. I knew the first time. So I said, how about we just stand up there and tell them today there's going to be no slides, and we're just going to answer your questions. And he said, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard of it, and it'll never work. As soon as he got the words out that there were no slides, half the group stood up and applauded. So where I'm going with that is you begin by listening, but back to the point, you made it. I think you picked up on it right away, was listen more. Ask them questions. Ask them to ask you questions and see what questions they're asking you. That was one of the takeaways we had from that day. I said, what questions did they ask you? They well, we wrote them down. I'm like, good. Because the questions they're asking you carry a lot of merit to what they want to see around here. If they're asking you about something, it's the front of their mind. They were willing to bring it up in front of their peers. Mm-hmm. And some of the questions were, we could toss out, right? But overall, there were definitely themes. And so they began that journey by starting to listen. And they were because, when you get in trouble like that, they knew they were in trouble, right? They're $400,000 a month down, right?
Month, okay.
Yeah, they were scrambling like crazy, trying to do whatever they could. So they were talking. And all they had to really do was start listening. There was a lot more to the journey, don't get right at that.
Sure.
But not to oversimplify. It wasn't just like, hey, we went in one day and had a great
right. We asked them if they had any questions, and then suddenly we're turning a profit.
The whole culture changed. No, but it took time. Yeah. And I think that was what the most important piece of that to me was that it was a self-realization or self-actualization by the management team of where they were at. They were able to step back and go, those were a lot of questions we didn't anticipate. So it made them start thinking, like, maybe back to the curiosity piece, made them start thinking, okay, why are they asking those questions? And they had to take the questions. Taking feedback is, we all say it's a gift on LinkedIn, but it's a gift if it's positive, right? Not too many people take negative feedback well, any of us, right? It's hard. But if you want to improve, that's what world-class athletes, that's what world-class pianists, that's, they all do the same thing. They all take that negative feedback and say, okay, I can improve.
Sure. Well, and that even goes back to, the example I shared earlier of team member saying, I want a review. I want to have a review meeting, not just because she wants to give me feedback, but because she wants feedback so that she can improve. Absolutely. Right. And so to me, that was a sign that was, doubly important for me. It was, wow, I should really be doing a better job of this. And this is the sign of a good person who wants to improve themselves and will be an asset to my organization as a result of that. Absolutely. John, thank you so much. We're going to share your contact information along with this episode. Really appreciate you being here to be part of the conversation. I think it was a great one.
Pleasure was mine. It's a conversation that it's a topic I think you could probably tell that I like a little bit. So yeah. I enjoy it. So thank you very much, and best luck to you. And again, thank you for everything your organization does for us. So I'll give you a plug there. I think that if you're looking for branded material, Matt has helped us create branded material that we didn't think of, and also has done a fantastic job of delivering. I think in very difficult times. So,
well, I appreciate it, and at the end of the day, that's the what we do, but the strategic initiatives that we support are what we're really interested in learning about with our clients. And so that's the essence of this podcast. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Irresistible Brand Podcast. I hope you enjoyed our conversation. Again, I'm Matt Deutschman from Doubletake Promotional Marketing, where we specialize in promotional products and branded merchandise with a focus on the strategic initiatives of client appreciation, referral generation, employee engagement and retention, and recruiting and onboarding. Organizations that execute those areas well create an irresistible brand. If you haven't checked it out yet, visit doubleTakeBrandBarometer.com for our quick 5-minute assessment to see how well your organization performs in those areas and get some advice on where you can improve and where you can leverage existing strengths. Our mission is to help you make your brand irresistible. See you again next time.